Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. My story begins about 3 years ago when I purchased a 40-acre horse ranch that had been my dream for as long as I could remember. It wasn't fancy by any means, but it had everything I needed. A modest farmhouse, 2 well-maintained barns, fenced pastures, and the most beautiful view of the mountains you could imagine. I'd spent years saving up for this place, and when I finally signed those papers, I felt like I'd won the lottery. The ranch is located about 20 minutes outside of town, with only a few scattered properties nearby. Most of my neighbors are other small ranchers or farmers who keep to themselves. That is, except for the fancy gated community that was built about half a mile down the road a year after I moved in. Whispering Pines Estates, they called it, with their cookie-cutter McMansions and perfectly manicured lawns. I didn't pay much attention to them at first, live and let live, right? They did their thing, I did mine. I spent my days tending to my 6 rescue horses, maintaining the property, and occasionally giving riding lessons to local kids. It was a peaceful existence, and I was happier than I'd ever been. That all changed when the HOA president of Whispering Pines decided to introduce herself to me one sunny afternoon in June. I was out in the pasture, replacing a section of fencing that one of my more rambunctious horses had damaged when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Looking up, I saw a shiny black Mercedes SUV pulling up my driveway. A woman dressed in what had to be an expensive pantsuit stepped out, her high heels completely inappropriate for a ranch. She looked around with an expression that suggested she'd just stepped in something unpleasant. "Hello?" I called out, setting down my tools and walking toward her. "Can I help you?" She plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi there. I'm the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I've been meaning to come by and introduce myself." I wiped my hands on my jeans and extended one. "Nice to meet you. What brings you out here today?" She ignored my outstretched hand and instead pulled out a business card from her designer purse. "Well, I've been driving by your property for months now, and I just had to tell you what a charming place you have here. So rustic and authentic." "Thanks," I said, taking the card and giving it a quick glance. Her name was printed in elegant script, followed by President Whispering Pines Homeowners Association and several contact numbers. "I've been thinking," she continued, her eyes scanning my property with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Our community has several events throughout the year, garden parties, fundraisers, that sort of thing, and your ranch would be the perfect venue for our summer gala. It's a charity event, you know, for the children." I blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not sure I understand. You want to host an event here? On my property?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. It would be wonderful publicity for you. Our residents are very influential people. Doctors, lawyers, executives. They could really help put your little operation on the map." I frowned. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't rent out my ranch for events. This is my home, not a venue." Her smile faltered just slightly. "Oh, we'd compensate you, of course. Say, $500 for the evening, and we'd handle all the setup and cleanup." I almost laughed. $500 barely covered a day's worth of feed and care for my horses, let alone having a bunch of strangers trampling all over my property. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested," I said firmly. "This is a working ranch, not an event space. Plus, my horses get nervous around crowds of unfamiliar people." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, you could just put the horses away for the evening. It would only be for a few hours." Now I was getting irritated. "The horses live here. I don't put them away for anyone's convenience. Again, I'm not interested." Her friendly demeanor evaporated instantly. "You know, as the Whispering Pines HOA president, I have considerable influence in this area. Our community brings a lot of tax revenue to the county. It would be in your best interest to maintain good relations with us." Was she seriously threatening me? "Look, I appreciate you stopping by, but I have work to get back to. My answer is no." She stared at me for a long moment before turning on her heel. "You'll be hearing from me again," she said over her shoulder as she got back into her Mercedes. "I always get what I want." I watched her drive away, kicking up dust on my gravel driveway, and shook my head. I dealt with entitled people before, but this was something else. Little did I know that this brief interaction was just the beginning of my nightmare. A week later, I received a letter in the mail with the Whispering Pines HOA logo on the envelope. Curious, I opened it to find a formal request to use my property for their summer gala, now offering $1,000. At least she'd upped her insulting offer, but my answer remained the same. I tossed the letter in the trash and went about my business. 3 days later, another letter arrived, this time with a check for $1,500 enclosed, and a note saying they'd taken the liberty of scheduling their event for the following month. I was furious. I returned the check with a firmly worded letter stating that my property was not for rent and any attempt to hold an event there would be considered trespassing. That's when things started to get weird. I began noticing cars with Whispering Pines parking stickers slowly driving by my property. Sometimes they'd stop and people would take pictures. Once I caught a group of men in suits walking along my fence line, pointing at different areas as if they were planning something. I called the non-emergency police line to report these suspicious activities. The officer who came out was sympathetic, but said there wasn't much they could do about people taking pictures from the public road. He advised me to post no trespassing signs, which I promptly did. The next day, all my signs had been torn down. Now thoroughly alarmed, I installed security cameras at my gate and around the perimeter of my property. It was an expense I hadn't budgeted for, but I was starting to feel like I needed to protect myself. A few days later, I received another unwelcome visit, this time from a man in a suit who introduced himself as the HOA aita attorney. He handed me an official-looking document. "What's this?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "It's a notice informing you that your property is in violation of several county ordinances," he explained in a bored tone. "Unsightly structures, improper fencing, unauthorized commercial activity, that sort of thing. The HOA is prepared to file formal complaints with the county unless you reconsider their offer to use your property for their event." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you seriously trying to blackmail me right now?" He had the audacity to look offended. "Not at all. We're simply pointing out that your property doesn't meet the standards expected in this area. As concerned citizens, we have a duty to report such violations." "Get off my property," I said through gritted teeth, "and tell your HOA president that her threats don't scare me." He shrugged and walked back to his car. "You'll be hearing from the county inspector soon." Sure enough, a county inspector showed up the very next day. Fortunately, he was an older gentleman who seemed to have little patience for HOA politics. He walked around my property, clipboard in hand, occasionally making notes. "So, what exactly am I in violation of?" I asked as he completed his inspection. He snorted. "Nothing that I can see. Your fencing meets code, your barns are well maintained, and your animals look healthy. As for running a commercial enterprise without proper permits..." He glanced down at his notes. "Giving a few riding lessons to local kids hardly qualifies. Whoever filed these complaints was reaching." Relief washed over me. "Thank you for being thorough." He tipped his hat. "Just doing my job. Between you and me, I've had run-ins with that Whispering Pines bunch before. They think their HOA rules apply to the whole county." He shook his head. "I'll file my report saying everything's up to code, but don't be surprised if they try something else." His warning proved accurate. 2 days later, I received a call from a woman who identified herself as a reporter from the local newspaper. She said she was working on a story about problematic rural properties causing issues for developing communities, and had received tips about my ranch. When I pressed her for more information, she admitted that the HOA president had contacted her directly. I decided it was time to play offense rather than defense. I called a lawyer friend who specialized in property disputes and explained the situation. She listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, and then sighed heavily. "Unfortunately, this kind of harassment isn't uncommon," she said. "HOA can wield a lot of power, and some of them get drunk on it, but they have absolutely no authority over your property, and what they're doing could constitute harassment and defamation. Let me draft a cease and desist letter. That might make them back off." The letter was delivered the next day. For a blessed week, things were quiet. No drive-bys, no letters, no unexpected visitors. I started to hope that maybe they'd gotten the message and moved on. Then came the morning I'll never forget. I woke up to the sound of engines and voices, lots of them. I threw on some clothes and rushed outside to find a fleet of vehicles parked at my gate, including several catering vans, a party rental truck, and what looked like a landscaping crew. Standing in the middle of it all, directing traffic like a symphony conductor, was the HOA president herself. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, jogging down to the gate, which thankfully was locked. She turned to me with a triumphant smile. "Oh good, you're up. We need you to open the gate so we can start setting up. The gala is tonight, and there's so much to do." I stared at her in absolute disbelief. "Are you insane? I've told you repeatedly that you cannot hold your event here. You need to leave immediately." "Don't be difficult," she snapped. "We've already sent out invitations with this address. Over 100 people are coming, including the mayor and several county commissioners. You don't want to embarrass yourself by making a scene." My blood was boiling now. "I'm calling the police. You have 5 minutes to get these people off my property line or you'll all be charged with trespassing." She laughed. "Go ahead and call." Do you really think they'll side with you over the most influential people in this county? I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, staring her down the whole time. I reported that I had multiple trespassers attempting to access my property without permission and requested immediate assistance. While waiting for the police to arrive, I documented everything with my phone's camera. The vehicles, the people, the catering equipment. The HOA president kept trying to convince the workers to force their way onto my property, but thankfully most of them seemed uncomfortable with the situation and stayed put. 20 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up. I recognized one of the officers as the same one who had come out when I reported the suspicious drive-bys. He took one look at the situation and shook his head. "Ma'am," he addressed the HOA president, "this is private property. The owner has not given you permission to be here." She thrust a document at him. "We have a contract. He agreed to let us use the property." I stepped forward. "That's a lie. I never signed anything." The officer examined the paper and then looked back at her with raised eyebrows. "This isn't a contract, it's a proposal, and there's no signature on it." "Well, he verbally agreed," she insisted. "No, I did not," I countered. "I have repeatedly told her in writing that my property is not available for her event." The officer handed the document back to her. "Ma'am, without the property owner's permission, you and your people need to leave immediately. You're blocking access to private property and creating a disturbance." "Do you know who I am?" she hissed. "Do you know who will be at our event tonight?" "Doesn't matter," the officer replied calmly. "The law applies equally to everyone. Now, I need you all to clear out or we'll start issuing citations for trespassing." She looked around at the assembled workers who were already starting to pack up their equipment, clearly not wanting to get involved in whatever this was. Her face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," she screamed at me. "You've made a powerful enemy today. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are." "Ma'am," the officer interjected, "that sounds like a threat. I'd advise you to calm down and leave peacefully." She glared at both of us, but finally stormed back to her Mercedes. As she was getting in, she pointed at me. "You'll regret this." Then she peeled out, nearly hitting one of the catering vans in her haste to leave. The officer turned to me. "You might want to consider getting a restraining order. I've had run-ins with her before. She doesn't take no for an answer." I thanked him for his help and started making calls as soon as everyone had left. First to my lawyer, then to the security company to upgrade my system. I had a feeling the HOA president wasn't going to let this go easily. I was right. Over the next few weeks, it seemed like she had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. First came the barrage of negative reviews for my small riding lesson business on every platform imaginable, even though most of the reviewers had clearly never set foot on my property. Then a story appeared in the local paper about unsafe and unsanitary conditions at a local horse ranch, though they carefully avoided naming me directly. The final straw came when I discovered someone had left 2 of my pasture gates open during the night, allowing 3 of my horses to wander out. Thankfully, they hadn't gone far, and I was able to round them up quickly, but the thought of what could have happened made me sick to my stomach. One of those horses was a rescue who had been severely abused before coming to me. He was finally starting to trust humans again, and an incident like this could have set back months of careful rehabilitation. My security cameras had caught the culprit. A young man in a Whispering Pines maintenance uniform who had clearly been directed to trespass on my property. This was no longer just harassment. It was endangering innocent animals. I immediately called the police and showed them the footage. They arrested the maintenance worker the same day, and under questioning, he admitted that the HOA president had paid him $200 to open the gates. He claimed she told him it was a harmless prank to teach me a lesson. With this confession in hand, my lawyer filed for an emergency restraining order against the HOA president, which was granted immediately. We also filed a civil lawsuit for harassment, defamation, trespassing, and reckless endangerment of animals. The HOA president hired an expensive attorney from the city who tried to have the case thrown out, arguing that she was acting in her official capacity as HOA president and therefore had qualified immunity. The judge didn't buy it, especially after we presented evidence that the HOA board had never authorized her actions and that she had been acting on her own. As the lawsuit progressed, more details emerged. It turned out that the HOA president hadn't just been planning to use my ranch for a charity gala. She had been telling potential homebuyers that Whispering Pines included access to a community equestrian facility, my ranch. She had even collected additional fees from residents for this non-existent amenity, pocketing the money herself. When this came to light, several Whispering Pines residents joined my lawsuit as co-plaintiffs, claiming fraud. The HOA board, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, voted to remove her as president and issued a public apology to me and their residents. The court case lasted almost a year, but the outcome was worth the wait. The judge ruled entirely in our favor, awarding me $150,000 in damages and issuing a permanent restraining order against the former HOA president. She was also ordered to repay the fraudulent fees she had collected, which amounted to over $75,000. But the best part? The publicity from the case actually helped my riding lesson business. People from all over the county became interested in the ranch that stood up to the notorious HOA president, and my calendar filled up with new students. I used some of the settlement money to build a covered arena so I could offer lessons year-round, fulfilling another long-held dream. As for the former HOA president, I heard she moved out of state after the scandal. Apparently, being exposed as a fraud and a bully made it difficult for her to maintain her influential status in the community. Sometimes when I'm out in the pasture with my horses, watching them graze peacefully against the backdrop of mountains, I think about how close I came to losing all of this to someone's entitlement and greed. It reminds me how important it is to stand your ground when you know you're in the right, even when facing intimidation and threats. My ranch is thriving now, and I've even started a program offering free riding therapy for kids with disabilities. A real charity, not a fake one used as an excuse for a fancy gala. And every now and then I get a visit from the county inspector who first stood up for me. He brings his grandkids for riding lessons and always greets me with the same words. Good to see someone who knows their rights and isn't afraid to defend them. I couldn't agree more. The whole ordeal taught me that sometimes fighting back isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about setting a precedent that prevents others from becoming victims too. The residents of Whispering Pines now have a much more transparent and accountable HOA, and I have the peace and security I always wanted on my little piece of heaven. Sometimes I wonder if the former HOA president ever reflects on how her actions backfired so spectacularly. Her attempt to bully me into submission not only failed but ended up strengthening my position in the community and exposing her own corruption. I guess the moral of the story is, don't mess with someone's dream, especially when they've worked their whole life to achieve it, and definitely don't mess with someone's horses. That's just asking for trouble. Update 2 years later. You won't believe what happened next. It's been just over 2 years since I won my lawsuit against the nightmare HOA president, and I thought you all might appreciate an update on how things have turned out. So much has happened that I hardly know where to begin. First off, remember that covered arena I mentioned building with some of the settlement money? Well, it's now the centerpiece of what has become a thriving equestrian therapy center. What started as a small program offering free riding lessons to kids with disabilities has grown into a full-fledged nonprofit organization. We now have 6 specially trained therapy horses, 3 of which are new rescues, 4 part-time instructors, and a waiting list of clients from 3 counties over. The publicity from the lawsuit actually turned out to be the best advertising I never paid for. A local TV station picked up the story and did a segment on my battle with the HOA president. They included footage of my rescue horses and mentioned my plans for the therapy program. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up, and local businesses offered sponsorships. A nearby tack shop even donates equipment regularly. One of my favorite developments came from the most unexpected source, Whispering Pines residents themselves. After the HOA president was ousted, the new board reached out to me about building a proper relationship between our properties. Instead of trying to steamroll me, they asked if there was any way we could collaborate that would respect my privacy and property rights while giving their community some connection to the rural lifestyle they claim to value. After several thoughtful discussions, we came up with a solution that works for everyone. Once a month, I host an open barn day where Whispering Pines families can visit the ranch, learn about horse care, and enjoy guided trail rides. They pay a reasonable fee that goes directly to funding the therapy program, and in return, they get a genuine ranch experience. Many of the kids have become regular riding students, and several residents volunteer with our therapy program. This is what we actually wanted all along, one board member told me. Not some fake, exclusive access to your property, but a chance to be part of something authentic and meaningful. I'm sorry it took that awful situation for us to find the right approach. The county inspector who supported me early on, his granddaughter with autism has become one of our star riders. Watching her confidence grow as she's learned to communicate with her therapy horse has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. You know, he told me recently, I've been an inspector for over 30 years, and I've seen all kinds of property disputes. Most end with bitterness on both sides. But what you've created here after all that ugliness, well, it's something special. As for the former HOA president, there's been some karmic justice there too. Remember how I mentioned she moved out of state? Well, about 6 months ago, I received an interesting email from a lawyer in Colorado. Apparently, our litigious friend had moved there and attempted to pull similar stunts with a small family farm next to her new community. When they resisted, she began the same campaign of harassment and intimidation. But this time, her reputation preceded her. The Colorado lawyer had found articles about our case while researching hers and reached out to me for information. I was happy to provide copies of all my documentation, and my lawyer sent over the complete case file. "You saved us months of headaches," the Colorado lawyer wrote in a follow-up email. "With your case as precedent, we shut her down before she could really get started. The judge took one look at her history and granted our restraining order immediately. I later heard through the grapevine that she was forced to pay their legal fees and was banned from serving on any HOA board in the county. Sometimes the universe does balance things out." On a personal note, my little operation, as she so condescendingly called it, has expanded in ways I never imagined. I've added another 15 acres to the property, built a second barn, and hired 2 full-time ranch hands to help with the increased workload. The riding lesson business has tripled, and I've even started a small breeding program focusing on horses with the right temperament for therapy work. Last month, I was honored with a community service award from the county for the work our therapy program does with veterans dealing with PTSD. Accepting that award on the same stage where the former HOA president used to host her charity galas felt like the perfect full-circle moment. One unexpected outcome of this whole saga was a romance that blossomed amidst the chaos. Remember my lawyer friend who helped me fight the case? Well, all those late nights reviewing evidence and preparing for court led to a connection that went beyond professional. We've been dating for a year now, and last weekend he proposed to me right in the center of the covered arena, surrounded by the horses and the kids from our therapy program. I said yes, of course. We're planning a small wedding here at the ranch next spring. And yes, we've invited the new Whispering Pines HOA board members, but with proper invitations, not by showing up with catering trucks unannounced. Perhaps the most meaningful moment of these past 2 years happened just last week. A woman showed up for a tour of our therapy facilities. She seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. As we walked through the barn, she kept her head down and spoke very little. Finally, as we reached the covered arena and watched the therapy session in progress, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "My son has autism," she said quietly. "His doctors say equine therapy could help him, but we've been on waiting lists for months. Then I heard about your program." That's when I recognized her. She had been on the HOA board under the former president. She had been one of the people taking pictures of my property during those intimidating drive-bys. I felt a moment of hesitation, but it passed quickly. The woman before me wasn't the entitled board member following orders anymore. She was just a mother looking for help for her child. "We happen to have an opening in our Tuesday afternoon session," I told her. "Why don't you bring him next week, and we'll see if it's a good fit?" Her relief was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered. "And I'm sorry for everything before. I should have stood up to her, but I was afraid of becoming her next target." I nodded, understanding completely. "That's in the past. This place is about healing now for everyone who needs it." As she left, I stood in the center of the arena, watching my students on their horses. Some were children who might never have had this opportunity if I had given in to intimidation. Some were veterans finding peace after trauma. Some were Whispering Pines residents who had become part of our ranch family instead of entitled outsiders trying to claim ownership. If you had told me 3 years ago that a nasty property dispute would lead to all of this, I would never have believed it. Sometimes the worst experiences lead to the best outcomes if you're stubborn enough to stand your ground and open-minded enough to see new possibilities among the ruins of old conflicts. So that's my update. The ranch is thriving, the community is healing, and even some of the people who once viewed my property as something to be taken have become its biggest supporters. As for me, I wake up every morning grateful for this life I fought so hard to protect. It wasn't just about property rights or standing up to a bully. It was about preserving a place where good things could happen, and they have, every single day. P.S. The horses are all doing great, especially the rescue who got out when the gates were left open. He's now our star therapy horse with a special talent for working with the most anxious children. Turns out he just needed to feel safe and valued, something I think we can all relate to. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This happened last night. I am now in a good enough spot to actually post this. I'm not quite sure if it qualifies as pro, but it definitely isn't petty. I am a professional driver. As such, on the roads in the US, there are different truck stops throughout the country that has a pay-to-park system, usually about 10 to 20% of the lot marked off as reserved, with each space running from $15 to $25. The truck stop where this took place had parking for $17, which is relatively cheap for a guaranteed spot. The spots are reserved for 24 hours, starting at 4 p.m. local time and extending to 3 p.m. the following afternoon. I knew that I would have a late-night delivery, so I came to the truck stop around 3:30 and paid for a reserve spot. I told the manager on duty that I had a delivery up the road that night and would be back once delivery was completed, but should still be able to clear out the spot by the next afternoon, today. She told me that this was okay, and she would mark the spot as sold when I left. That way, if someone else comes in trying to reserve that spot, she could consult her notes and deny the sale. 11:15 p.m. rolls around, I take off for my delivery. I don't get out of that facility until 2:30 a.m. the next morning, this morning. So, I groggily drive back to the truck stop to reclaim my paid-for spot, only to find that the reserved parking spaces are all full. I call the manager on duty and after giving her my info, inform her that all the spots are full and that someone has parked in a spot and hasn't paid for it. She sends her other employee out to start checking trucks. The culprit was from a company that is known for their bright orange trailers, and he was a company driver. The other employee starts banging on his door to inform him that he is parked illegally and he has to move. Meanwhile, I can see the commotion from my mirror, with my vantage point in the fuel island, where I had been instructed to temporarily park. The driver answers the door with a bottle of Heineken in one hand and some sort of smoking implement in another. I know what it is, but for the sake of the mods, I'm not going to say it. I decided to roll down the window to hear the commotion, and I hear the employee tell the driver to either move or he will get the towing company and police involved. This driver is flat out irate that someone had the audacity to tell him where he can and cannot park, so he slams the door on the employee, threatening him. Employee calls the police and tow company, and the police show up first. I had worked for this company before, so I know their policies and, more importantly, what they can and cannot have in their trucks. Alcoholic beverages are not allowed in the cab. Anything that isn't a cigarette or a cigar and a lighter, also not allowed. The coup de grace, a pew-pew of any kind, absolutely not allowed, and especially not allowed loaded. This driver had all that, and some other not-so-legal substances in his cab, so he was hauled away in cuffs. His truck was hauled away on a wrecker. I made a call after the commotion died down to the company safety director and informed them that their rig will be in an impound lot and their driver is going to jail over the not-so-legal stuff he had in his truck. She thanked me and said that he will definitely lose his job, especially over the alcohol and the other not-so-legal stuff. I guess he played the screw around and find out card, and it bit him in his career. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.